One of the things I specifically tell customers when we put forced air systems in and they were oversized, you had leaky duct systems and you had the warm supplier temperature of forced air furnaces, and it masked a lot of our mistakes. And speaking honestly, I put in hundreds of systems that were not sized right. Customers were happy just because the oversized furnace had a leaky duct system and it kept the customers comfortable to an extent, but the customers didn't know that it could be better. When you put in a heat pump, the heat pump doesn't have that upside. So all your mistakes are exposed.
Hey everyone, quick public service announcement. We just put out our first ebook. It's our top 10 heat pump sales tips that we've gotten from the experts we've had on this podcast. It's totally free, so if you want it, click the link in the show notes to get your copy. Okay, on to the show. Hi, and welcome to the Heat Pump Podcast. I'm Ed Smith.
And I'm Eric Fitz. We are co-founders of Amply Energy.
Today, we are thrilled to have Brynn Cooksey joining us, founder and owner of Air Doctors in Michigan. Thanks for being here, Brynn.
Thanks for having me, Ed and Eric. I've been a fan of you guys' podcast for a long time. It's funny, I stumbled upon your podcast on accident. I was in the airport. I listened to other favorites like HVAC School and Bill Spohn's podcast, and Spotify was giving me a recommendation. So I was looking at the recommendations and I see this heat pump podcast and I'm like, what is this? I haven't heard of this before. And I started looking into it and you guys were interviewing all my friends. So I've been hooked ever since. So thanks for having me.
Appreciate it. You know Peter Trost, who runs Energy Circle?
I do.
When we were launching the pod, we were talking to him about it. He did our marketing website. And so we go to him for tons of marketing advice. And we're thinking about launching a podcast. And he said, what's the title going to be? And we said, the Heat Pump Podcast. And he gets this really sour look on his face. We're like, what's wrong? He's like, it's very descriptive. And so he said we shouldn't call it that, but I actually don't know if it's a good title or not. But I'm glad Spotify recommended it to you, and at least you listened to it because your friends were on here.
Absolutely. I thought the title there was no guesswork. I got in, I knew what I was expecting. So
Awesome.
Let's hope we never pivot onto focusing on something else in HVAC. We're pretty locked in.
You have a lot of explaining to do, that's for sure.
Yeah, totally. Brynn, you do about 15 things. Would you paint us a picture of your professional, extracurricular? Give it a sense of like how you spend a week.
We get a lot of jokes about that. People swear I have a clone. No, Air Doctors, which is our crown jewel, that's our home performance contracting business based out of Southeast Michigan. And we evolved from a heating and cooling company. And basically that business, we take the whole house approach. So we do attic air sealing, we do insulation, we do the mechanicals. And our goal in that business is basically to help customers get total house renovations and then actually help them save money on their utility bills and also gain comfort. So that's I'll say, small to medium-sized contracting business that we run. And really, my day-to-day is not much into the business just because I have a phenomenal team. So it takes care of itself, but I did found it after some help from my parents initially when they were in the business. HVAC U, years ago, I also taught for a couple of community colleges in the area. And we found HVAC U because we were getting requests to go into contractor shops and actually help them with technical training, reducing callbacks and doing ride-alongs. So we've got enough requests where we formed a business, and that business has grown substantially. And now we're doing a lot of workforce training. So I'll say the bulk of my time, I'll say my week is in HVAC U doing training and content creation. We do a little bit of work with Pearl Edison. Pearl Edison, we were their initial contractor when they started up their business. And we'll talk about that, I guess, a little bit later in the show. But my role with Pearl Edison is the design and consulting to help them implement building science into their software platform. And then another company we have a really good relationship is eSpring. They help take a lot of our in-person building science courses and help make them into online and on-demand courses that we can get to many more people who are looking for training. So it sounds like a lot, but you know what? The common theme is all building science. So I'll talk to anybody who talks to me about building science. So they just happen to want to listen.
So, man, that's quite a range of projects, businesses, activities that you're involved in. It's super impressive. And yeah, it's going to be fun to dive into those a bit more. Can you actually go back a little bit and like, how did you get into the space? Why building science? Why HVAC?
So HVAC, I have a story similar to other people. I was doing it as a kid with my father. So during the summer times, And when I was out of school, it was like my first high school job. So I picked it up. And then when I got to the age to support myself, it was a natural progression. I was in HVAC and I thought myself to be a pretty conscientious technician. I cared about what I was doing and I always wanted to learn. But I got bit by the building science bug. I took a building science class about 20 years ago and it blew up my ego. Boy, did I learn what I didn't know. I was able to find problems that I didn't even know was there. And ever since then, I just incorporated building science into our business practices.
And so your sales and design process, like having Air Doctors being an HVAC company that's now a home performance contracting company. I heard you say during one of your presentations I was watching, you said that you moved into more building science and holistic to avoid, I think the quote was, a race to the bottom of box swapping. Tell us more about how this differentiates you and how it helps you avoid that race to the bottom.
Well, great question. So if you look at the contracting business as a whole, especially with HVAC businesses, you're trying to move products and equipment. And if you don't have anything to separate yourself as far as marketing, you're going to be grouped together by the customer. And without education, the customer is going to look for the lowest price. So using building science, we were able to show the customer that they had problems. The customer knew they had problems, but they just didn't know that there was a measurement to identify that problem. And once we tied the building science and actually giving that customer education, we were then able to show the customer those additional problems. And at the same time, that presentation separated us from other contractors. So building science, the education piece with the customer has been huge. It's been a success for our business.
So, Brynn, totally makes sense. When we talk to our customers about exactly this thing, there's this question around what does the actual process look like? What does the in-home process look like? What does the sales process look like? How do you not spend too much time, but enough time? It's like, I'd love to just go for a double click. Like when your salesperson is going to a home, like what does that experience for them and the homeowner look like to set up this building science oriented differentiation for you?
Very good question. So it starts with our CSR script. And basically our CSRs are trained to get enough information from the customer to set the stage for the salesperson to go in the house. Once the salesperson makes it there, we start the conversation by trying to flesh out exactly why the customer called. Was it high utility bills? Was it a comfort issue? Why did they call us? And we kind of have a guided survey we walk them through just to kind of all the bad news out there so we can talk about it. Once we get those responses, we take a process called a field trip, and we'll do some level of diagnostic testing to help the customer understand that their problem is measurable and it can be resolved. And we can test out to prove that we fixed it. And once the customer sees that level of detail, we let the customer buy, we don't sell. So they actually get to tell us what they're interested in, and they can't unsee what they saw. If we ran a door test, we have a thermal imaging camera. They can see the leaks. We measure static pressure. They see the static pressure is high. We can prove that the duct system is undersized. Once they see that, they can't unsee it. A high level of the time, the customers are impressed by what we did. None of our competitors are doing it. And as a result, they're more interested to actually do business with us. So that's our process.
Can I just make sure I got that? So the CSR call, get your bunch of info. Then there's a sales call where the salesperson's there to better understand the problem. And then there's a second trip to the home before install that's called the field trip. And that's when you do the testing, or are those two things combined?
Those two things go together. So the conversation, the sales call and the field trip are together at the same call.
Okay, got it. And so it's after discovering enough about the problem, then they'll know what to investigate more deeply for the field trip aspect. Okay.
You got it.
Very helpful. Can I ask you like a tacky question, but does this lead you to just charge a bit more than your competitors?
Absolutely. We're no bones about it. We're probably, if not the highest, pretty close to it. But it's not the same service. Again, we're not swapping a box. We're providing solutions. We test in and test out on every project. And as a result, to hit those numbers, we have to have the diagnostic testing. We spend a ton of training. The techs and comfort advisors have to be trained in order to use the building performance best practices and to educate with the customer. So you need soft skill training. So we're not the cheapest, but we say we're the best because of the solutions we provide.
It's a completely differentiated service, and it makes sense to me. And that's what it is to avoid the race to the bottom. The race to the bottom is a competition of price. So I figured that's what you would say, but honestly, I think that's great to hear. and would probably lead to a completely different level of homeowner satisfaction. All right. You mentioned briefly before Pearl Edison and your role with Pearl Edison. Would you tell us a little bit more about who Pearl Edison is and what they do? After that, I want to dig into that article you wrote with the founders over there.
Sure. So I want to say hello to Jake and Evan. They're the founders of Pearl Edison. So they approached us and they wanted to work with a reputable contractor basically so they can incorporate building science into their software platform. So what Pearl Edison does, they create a win-win scenario for everybody, all the stakeholders in a typical residential HVAC electrification project. And what stakeholders, they have a customer-facing software that as the customer inputs data, it gives them recommendations based on the customer's budget. It gives them recommendations on what their goals are. So if a customer is altruistic and wants to have an electrification system for fighting carbon emissions, the software will actually show them what impact they'll have by what system they select. So the software is really good at showing the customers exactly what they need to know. And it also helps them do the research on whatever tax credits or rebates are available in their area. So the customer gets good upfront pricing. They get their utility bill impact. They get a load calc. They get their climate impact. And then if the customer decides to fulfill their transaction, we have a network of contractors that we've trained on installation best practices. And where the contractor benefits, they get jobs, not leads. So they actually get work orders where they maybe not have to sell or they don't have to invest a ton in marketing to get heat pump related electrification jobs or any heating and cooling jobs in that matter. They don't have to market as much to get those qualified customers to do the work. So I was their initial contractor in this model. And in my business alone, they helped me reduce my operating costs about 12%, which was huge, just because they provided jobs, not leads.
Those jobs were scoped the way you wanted? Because I could see that being tricky. Like, they give you a job. I assume that means it's priced and everything else. And you showed up and you didn't have to completely redesign whatever their quote was or scope of work?
So by me being contractor zero or patient zero, as we joke, I did a lot of the designing work and with the input of mine of what contractors would be looking at in the future. So to a contractor, the load calc is done, and we at Pearl, we take all the risk, right? The duct modifications are laid out. So the contractors armed with everything that they need. And if there is a change order, Pearl takes care of that. So it's really designed to give the contractor just a work order where they can just go to town, they can put the equipment in, put it in correctly based on our specs, and then we're getting a good install that was designed properly and a happy customer. So the initial design concepts were me, and then we basically put that into our software program. So the joke around Pearl is there's a little bit of me inside the software using building science.
That's amazing. And I'm curious, Pearl's been around for a little bit. Roughly how many projects are they doing a year, a month? Yeah, these days.
So our heat pump pilot project, we started off we just finished it up early this year. Last year, we did about 40 heat pump projects, and that was the pilot phase. We're now starting to leverage states where the rebate dollars were launched, like Michigan. So to give you an answer, Eric, we're not 100% sure of what they've done to date, but we are in several markets, including Pittsburgh and eventually Colorado.
So Brynn, Ed and I came across this incredible article. Honestly, it's really like an entire report that you helped author with the folks at Pearl Edison, where we can't go through everything. It's an incredible article. We'll definitely drop it in the show notes so other folks can check it out. But we'd love to dive into maybe 5 of the major sort of 10 points that the whole article goes through. We'll call out some specific points we want to cover, and then we'd love to hear kind of your thoughts on it, the nuance, let you expand on it a bit. So the first one we really wanted to hit on is really this concept that electrification it's a critically important step, but it's not always necessarily the right first step. Can you just talk about some of the challenges, particularly when we're thinking about homes with a high energy burden, other things we need to think about to get homes electrification ready?
That's a good question, Eric. So what we mean by that, if you look at a lot of the federal incentives, a lot of it was geared for income eligible families. And we, learning building science, we always wanted to stay away from trying to have the box or HVAC product solve a problem. Right. Typically, it's not the product itself, it's a combination of the product, the duct system, and the envelope. So what we meant by that when we wrote that statement, it was basically to help underline, I love Ed Jonowick's statement where he said you can't HVAC your way out of a bad box. Basically, what he means by that, sometimes the building shell has to get addressed first in order for you to have a product that's going to work properly. So when we did our pilot and we had these houses that were older Detroit metro area housing stock, they were really leaky, had poor insulation. So maybe a heat pump, full inverter, size to the heating load, maybe that's not the option for that house. Maybe it doesn't fit well. Because the last thing we wanted to do was to put a heat pump system in and the customers were burdened because of high energy bills. And it wasn't the equipment, it was actually the building shell. So attacking the building shell first, that's key. And then also other upgrades might need to be done, such as electrical service change. That might have to be upgraded in order to accommodate a heat pump. So looking at every house case by case, sometimes if we couldn't address the shell, maybe we were restricted to a dual fuel system. So we just had to look at the whole entire house as a system just to make sure that we get these heat pumps in correctly.
Yeah, it makes a ton of sense. And I'm sure you even have situations where there's basic health and safety things you need to address. So, maybe you have knob and tube wiring in the home, let alone you need to do an electrical service upgrade. You got to address that knob and tube before you're insulating the walls and or doing that full service upgrade. So yeah, you got to watch out for that kind of stuff too.
Absolutely. All the stuff like that we run into with an older housing stock, you definitely have to take those into account. So when we coined that statement in our write-up, that was what we were after, that electrification is important. We do believe that it's the best step for climate change, and eventually it should be done, but you have to have a practical approach about implementing it before customers can really benefit from the new technology.
You just mentioned dual fuel. Can you just go a little bit further into that? A lot of folks, when they're talking about electrification, they're like, oh my gosh, wait a minute, we can't use any fossil fuels. You're crazy. But let's talk about why dual fuel is actually an important part of the solution.
We do have some hardcore enthusiasts where they're right. Carbon emissions is the focal point. But again, from a practical standpoint, I think it'll be a long time before we completely get rid of fossil fuels. And again, we have to do it in a way where doing market transformation, we don't burden our customers. So in our pilot that we ran, I'll say vast majority of the systems we put in were dual fuel, where we would size to the cooling load for the heat pump, and we would have a economical balance point, maybe about 40 degrees, where the heat pump would trip and then the gas furnace would take on. And doing it that way, you're still getting a good chunk of that system or house covered through electrification. Those part load days where you don't need the muscle gas heat, the heat pump is running. So I feel it shouldn't be an all or nothing thing. I think dual fuel has its place, especially in climates where like ours. And it's really important in areas or markets with high utility rates. If your kW per hour rate is really high, you may not get the full benefit of a cold climate heat pump because it's going to be too costly to run. So dual fuel has its place in the HVAC industry.
Yeah, absolutely. We like to look at, if you take the ratio of the dollars per kilowatt hour compared to like dollars per therm, there are just certain markets in the country where that ratio isn't right. And natural gas is so cheap relative to the kilowatt hours, even with the massive efficiency benefits of a heat pump, it's hard to overcome some of those operational costs. And yeah, dual fuel can make a ton of sense. And as you pointed out, if you're actually making that switch over at a relatively low temperature, maybe it's only a few hundred hours you're actually running that gas system. So you're getting 95% of those sort of carbon reduction benefits.
Yes.
But also you're making sure you don't hit that homeowner with operational costs, utility bills that are just completely unmanageable.
I agree with you 100%, Eric. And even to sweeten the pot, a lot of times we would specify a modulating gas furnace where it will only produce the output that's needed to offset the load. So even then you can reduce carbon emissions. So your method that you just described, that's exactly how we went about our pilot program.
Kind of interesting. I forget if we talked about this at the symposium, Brynn, but Amply started where Pearl Edison is. So our first 18 months, we actually did a pilot phase that's the same size as, we did a few dozen homes for full home electrification, weatherization, solar, heat pump, hot water heater, panel upgrade, all that sort of stuff. So the sort of the things you guys are, some of the bunch of the stuff you're commenting on from the work you all did is near and dear to Eric and my heart, which is why I'm very intrigued to ask about the fourth point in the report, which is the heat pump cowboys are coming. Consumer protection is about providing homeowners, I'm quoting you all now. Consumer protection is about providing homeowners with enough information to make well-informed choices, not just checkbox compliance. Otherwise, these opportunists will sell homeowners a system based on false expectations and bad energy modeling. I would love to hear more about that one.
Absolutely. Let me explain. So in Michigan locally, I personally, our company, our doctors, we pulled out 5 systems last year. They were sold. They went in, the customers' bill skyrocket, and they were oversized heat pumps. They couldn't manage the moisture. And when we pulled all 5 out, each heat pump was replaced to the tune of about $20,000 a piece. So it is definitely occurring in the marketplace where heat pumps are the new craze. Everybody's asking for them. There's a lot of misinformation, if you will, that's out there. So one of the things we're concerned about is if a contractor isn't trained properly, it can not be malice. It can be just a contractor just not educated, where they're putting these systems in and they're doing a customer a huge disservice. And one of the things I specifically tell customers, when we put forced air systems in and they were oversized, you had leaky duct systems and you had the warm supplier temperature of forced air furnaces, and it masked a lot of our mistakes. And speaking honestly, I put in hundreds of systems that were not sized right. Customers were happy just because the oversized furnace had a leaky duct system and it kept the customers comfortable to an extent, but the customers didn't know that it could be better. When you put in a heat pump, the heat pump doesn't have that upside. So all your mistakes are exposed with duct leaks and stuff like that. So if you don't have a properly trained contractor or technician doing a due diligence on a design part, you're going to get customers who are going to have bad outcomes. And that's what we want to avoid. I have seen some bills, utility bills with my own 2 eyes that were north of $1,500 a month in our peak winter season. So with that being said, if the funds from a federal incentives are geared towards low income or income eligible families, that's a huge burden. So we just want to make sure that any contractor that works with us, they're trained on best practices so we can have good outcomes.
Are you telling me then that a heat pump system won't modulate down to the perfect amount 12 months a year, no matter how big it is?
I'm telling you, the heat pump system is a small portion of the system, and you need duct system and an envelope to make it all work together. So I would agree with that statement.
Nice. I want to make a quick shout out to Steve Rogers and the Energy Conservatory. In episode 13 of the Heat Pump podcast, we interviewed Steve, and he went into a whole bunch of great examples around why duct leakage to the outside is such an important thing to catch and fix. Because if you're not aware of it, you swap out the equipment, you can actually make things even worse. And it's such an important topic. I encourage folks to check out that episode as well.
I love Steve. Steve's a good friend. I love that company also. So that was one of the episodes I was glued and I was in my living room listening to it. And my wife heard me agreeing and she was like, what the heck is going on? And I'm listening to Steve preach. So absolutely. I love the Energy Conservatory and Steve's a good friend. But he's 100% right. If you leak air out the duct system, it's inside the conditioned space. It's still in a box, so it's not as bad. But when you leak it outside the thermal and pressure boundary, that energy is gone. It causes building pressures, which can also affect comfort, and it can also cause indoor air quality issues. So if a well-meaning contractor doesn't have that building science training and they do a heat pump retrofit and they don't look at that, they're asking for trouble. So we definitely need to get more building science training out there to our technicians and contractors.
I'd love to jump into the 5th key point because it plays into what we were just talking about. So in the article, you talk about bad system design and bad installs are really common. Unfortunately, you mentioned this again in the article that a lot of projects go to best salesperson, not necessarily the best engineer or technician. Can you just talk more about that and what we can do to help address that particular challenge?
That's one of Pearl Edison's key is to have good contractors win. When looking at you have some contractors that may have large marketing budgets or they spend a fair amount of money on soft skills and training techniques to help them close at the kitchen table. Sometimes those companies may not have the building science effect behind them, and maybe their large operating budgets, or maybe they buy a lot of equipment and they can get equipment a little bit cheaper than maybe a smaller contractor. So it's not a fair playing field sometimes just because that contractor has to grow to that point in order to become successful. So one thing with Pearl Edison, we're trying to make it where the customer has the best information and that the contractor sees jobs, not leads. Marketing forever in my business was one of the largest expenses just because you have to put enough out there to get enough business back to pay your bills. So learning is a great way for contractors to get those jobs, those highly profitable jobs that can sustain their business without spending a ton of money on marketing, where they can take that resources and put it somewhere else in their business.
We got one more we want to ask about, which we picked our favorite 5, but all 10 points in this article were fantastic. We'll link to it in the show notes. So this one was intriguing to me. It's important that home electrification is profitable for good contractors. It's almost so obvious that it didn't need to be stated, but why did you guys need to state it? Tell us more about that.
We work with some of the good friends at PNNL, one of the laboratories for DOE, and one of our projects is trying to reduce the resistance for contractors to put in heat pumps. Heat pump marketplace transformation isn't new. It was attempted before, and the technology is a lot better now, but you have some contractors who are flat out afraid to put in heat pumps because of some of the horror stories where they don't work in cold climates. The customers will be uncomfortable. Their bills are going to go up. And that's because of the technology is one part of it, but also the same design practices that we're not doing a good job as the industry doing now, we were worse at it back then. So as a result, you have some contractors who absolutely do not want to touch heat pumps. And I've even had colleagues across the country in the energy sector who are trying to get heat pumps in and trying to get a part of the heat pump wave, and they're getting 3 quotes from contractors, and each and every contractor are telling them not to put heat pumps in. And it's a concern because their concerns are legitimate, but they can't be overcome. And I think they can be overcome with training, with proper training. So in order for a heat pump marketplace transformation to take place, contractors have to feel like they can put a heat pump in, it can go in correctly, they can set the controls, and their phone isn't going to ring when it gets 0 degrees outside and they're going to have an issue. So that's what they fear. And if you have a callback as a contractor, that just eats away, your profit goes away. So that's one of the things we're also trying to do is help with various organizations to reduce that resistance to selling heat pumps so that contractors can benefit from really a well-performing heat pump system is really some of the best comfort I've ever experienced. So if we can get contractors to understand that, I think we'll see some of that resistance come down.
It was interesting, Brynn. We just got to see each other in person at the Air Conditioning Contractors of America, the ACA 2025 conference. We were just at a couple of days ago, and one of the big sessions was with the manufacturers. And so that's all the big name manufacturers. You can list all the brands. I think most of them were represented. And they asked this question to the whole audience. And this is like contractors from across the whole country. I don't know, there's probably 400 or 500 people in the room. And I was amazed. They asked, raise your hand if you're installing heat pumps right now. And about half of the audience raised their hands. And this is certainly not a scientific study, but I think about the sort of the perceptions of attending the ACA conference in particular, even last year or the year before. Can't imagine that the audience participation or the number of folks reporting that they're installing heat pumps would be that high. So that was really promising, at least for me, to see that things are turning, that I think there's more and more contractors across the whole country that are embracing this technology and realizing if they're thoughtful, if they're addressing issues like you're talking about with the building envelope, they can have a lot of success and be profitable and be successful.
That's a great point, Eric. As a matter of fact, that's how I got connected with Pearl Edison. They were looking for contractors to help them run this pilot. And a lot of contractors were unwilling to put in heat pumps because of those fears. And I agree. I was in that same meeting, and it's still shocking to see heat pump adoption isn't quite where it needs to be. So I think together, as long as we continue to try to overcome those legitimate concerns, but like I said, they're not overwhelming, we can overcome them. I think we can push the ball down the road a little bit and start getting more adoption of heat pump technology.
Brynn, you're a guy who's on the cutting edge of a lot of stuff happening in building science and HVAC. What's going on or what's coming that's got you excited or optimistic about shifts in either heat pumps or home performance?
I like the fact that a lot of the federal incentives are placing the emphasis on proper design and building science, where participation into those programs, you actually have to go through training. So it's going to help kind of force people through the industry to go through training, the proper training to help reduce some of these bad outcomes. Because the same fears we have, a lot of states and other agencies have the same fear where they don't want to see poor heat pump installations go in, and it's on a large scale. So just imagine a city or state that has a ton of heat pump issues. So I've loved that to see that specific training has been in place to make sure that heat pumps go in correctly. In some of my building science classes, even recently, once we talk about like load calculations, I've had contractors literally on break doing our in-person class run outside to their truck and cancel all their jobs for next week to postpone them until they get load calcs done. So it's like slowly but surely we're getting the message across, hey, there's a proper way to do this. And I don't think it's malice. I think we just don't have enough resources to train everybody effectively. So I'm thrilled to see that.
That's awesome. I wish I could be there to see those cancellations happen. That's
Yes.
pretty inspiring.
It is. You overhear the conversations. Hey, Mr. Smith, we got to redo some stuff with your system. Do you mind if I come out next Friday instead of next Monday like I had planned? And it's awesome. They're getting their stuff together so that they can do a proper load calc. So it's absolutely, that warms my heart to see that, to see them take advantage. And you have to be humble enough to understand you have been doing it wrong for a long time, like I have, and that they are now trying to change. So I think if we can get more training out there, I think we'll see everything improve as a whole.
Is there anything else that we can do as an industry to help change the kind of homeowner perception or sort of distrust of contractors in general? I know you touched on this a little bit in the report, role of utilities, but what are you thinking about? How can we help just homeowners also be more comfortable with this change?
That's a very good point, Eric. I think a lot more resources to maybe educating the customer about what heat pumps are. Another true story, we had a customer who purchased a heat pump. It was two competing contractors. One contractor's bid was really high compared to the other, but he had a properly sized heat pump. He had dehumidification selected because the heat pump was sized to the heating load. He had all the stuff and bells and whistles. And I'll say contractor B did not. They were going to put in a heat pump, electric resistance, and there was no accounting for the electric and fuel rates. As a result, when a customer, they went with the lower bid, and that later on that winter last year, their bills skyrocketed. And his comment when we were doing a consultation with him after the fact was that it wasn't enough information for him to understand what decisions he was making. So I think as a whole, I think if we can start to produce some customer facing information to help them along with the decisions, I think that'll be very helpful.
Totally. It's interesting. The Abode, which helps manage some of the utility programs in Massachusetts, they've got a tool that allows homeowners to submit the different bids they've gotten from contractors, and then they will help do a comparison across the different systems that have been designed and provide guidance on what are those trade-offs between the systems that are not obvious for the average homeowner. I've got to see it for the first time just a few weeks ago. Maybe we can link to it in our show notes, but it's interesting to see tools like that starting to emerge that can really help homeowners just decipher all this new information that they're coming across the first time. Or people don't replace their HVAC systems very often. So it's maybe like once or twice in your lifetime that you're going to go through this whole process for most folks.
I agree with you 100%. That's a fantastic idea, Eric. You mentioned another point. Nobody on Saturday afternoon says, you know what? I'm going to buy a new heat pump today. They don't do that. Typically, it's an emergent situation. The older system is failing and they need to get something in there quickly. That process, if you think about it, what you're just talking about, that company being able to compare, and then just think about the contractor who was well-meaning. If he didn't communicate without diagnostic testing enough to the customer, they may just view that difference in just sales and add-on, and that customer may revert to a lower price point. So helping the customer not make that mistake will be huge in seeing rapid heat pump adoption.
And for those who aren't doing it in an emergency situation, then you're going to get, if the HVAC company's following recommendations in the industry for sales practices, they're going to get a good, better, and best for the 3 different companies who came in. That means if they have 3 companies come in to quote, they have 9 quotes to choose from. And I'm willing to bet none of those are exactly the same. So now the homeowner has 9 options to choose from. No idea how to decipher it. No one to help them think through that. Like, it is an incredibly complicated an unnerving decision.
It's a lot of money. Like Eric mentioned, it's outside your roof is probably one of the biggest investments in your home. And you're probably only going to make this decision a couple times in your lifetime. So it can cause a level of anxiety for customers for sure. And that's one of the reasons we like to get them involved with the diagnostic testing in our sales process so the customers can see their problems. That's exactly why we do it.
What gets me excited here is this is a big problem, but it also, with every problem, there's a huge opportunity. There's an opportunity for contractors to spend that extra time with their customers, to really educate them, to actually walk through the trade-offs of the proposals that they're making, and help empower the homeowner to make the best decision, both for their specific needs as occupants in the building, but also understand, hey, there's some of these challenges in my specific home, there are these constraints we have to deal with, and be able to understand, okay, this particular contractor is not trying to just make a buck. It looks like my house, I really need to do some extra duct insulation. And that's why it's going to cost a little bit more. And if you take that time, it's a way to completely differentiate yourself, again, from folks that aren't doing that. And you're going to end up with more profitable jobs, happier customers, better overall business.
Or as we like to say, Eric, we get out of the rat race. That's where you get out the rat race. Yep.
Awesome.
That is a great note, I think, to close on. And Brynn, our final question is always, what resources would you recommend to heat pump entrepreneurs who don't want to be heat pump cowboys, who want to do what's right, build a long-standing business with delighted customers? What resources would you point them towards to build that business and build that delighted customer base?
Excellent question. So I would say heat pump adoption is coming. I would say not to miss the boat with heat pump adoption and do it correctly. You need to focus on the design fundamentals. So the acronyms, the J and the S and the D. Buy out the time and just go to a class and understand exactly what the process is. And I always recommend that before even using a software system like Amply, just to understand that garbage in is garbage out. Start with the design process and then get a software program like you all's LiDAR tool is amazing. It makes the low calc process where I would have to go to a house and survey it and come back with a bunch of notes and put it into a software program. You can do a low calc relatively quickly. Use technology like that to make yourself more efficient. And if you start to do those things, you're removing really the risk from having bad installs and having warranties and rework. If you design it right on the front end, everything seems to take care of itself. So focus on the design aspect of it, seek that training out. And a lot of the training is costly, but it's an investment that will pay yourself. I can't imagine how many exits are involved by making that investment. So invest in yourself with the design courses, use technology. And I tried things on my own house, and it drives my wife nuts to see if it works. And like cutting our furnace size in half. She didn't believe that would work, but doing a low calc and actually showing her the numbers and proving it to her and proving it to myself, then we will incorporate it into a business. So that would be my advice. And the heat pumps are coming. Just do them right.
Awesome. Brynn, thank you so much for joining us. This was fantastic.
Thank you guys for having me. Again, I love you guys' podcast. I'll be listening in the future.
Fantastic. It was so much fun to have you on. I really appreciate it. We'll be in touch soon, man.
Thanks, Eric. Thanks, Ed.
Thanks for listening to the Heat Pump Podcast. It is a production of Amply Energy. And just a reminder that the opinions voiced were those of our guests or us, depending on who was talking. If you like what you've heard and haven't subscribed, please subscribe in your favorite podcast platform. We'd love to hear from you, so feel free to reach out. You can reach us once again at hello@amply.energy, no.com, just .energy. Thanks a lot.